You're listening to Bigfoot Society, and I'm Jeremiah Byron. Tonight's guest is one that didn't grow up looking for monsters, but monsters may have been looking for him. It started in the woods of Oregon when a scream ripped through the trees and sent two fearless dogs running 7 miles in the wrong direction. There's many accounts shared in this episode, including one visual description, which is the most detailed I've ever heard in my years of doing this show. This is a story of Stefan and the creature who stared back on the shores of Washington, so stay with us. All right, Bigfoot Society, we got the privilege of talking to Stefan today. Stefan is an individual who's a listener of the podcast, reached out about a lot of really interesting things that have been happening throughout his life. So we'll be talking about that today. Welcome to the show, Stefan. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I am really interested to see where this interview will go. You've told me a little bit about what we're getting into, and I'd say let's go ahead and feel free to take us as far back as you need to when things out of the ordinary started happening in your life, and we'll kind of go through the journey together and then see where we end up. So,
okay. So I came to your podcast because I began doing some research about Bigfoot for myself, because I had several experiences that didn't make sense to me. When I was a kid, I experienced some interesting things. It's one of these situations where I have to ask, do you want to take the blue pill or the red pill? The blue pill is that these are, I think, the blue pill is, I think, the experiences of Bigfoot and so forth can be viewed through the lens of that they're a physical being and that they will act and respond according to natural law. The red pill is that there's a whole lot of other stuff going on in a universe that we can't explain, and our attempt to really understand the subject of Bigfoot may only come once we have a closer communication field open with an actual society of Bigfoots. I don't know how you say Bigfoot or Big Feet, because it also seems that Bigfoot are very different in different parts of the world, as far as what I understand. I don't know a whole lot about Bigfoot, let me put it that way. I only know what I've learned from research and heard over your podcast and a couple others, as well as searching on the internet. And it seems to be that there is a lot of known markers or commonalities amongst things, but there still also seems to be a great deal of unknowns. And so I'm in the group, along with, most everybody else, I would say, is that we don't really know. So when I was a kid, I started experiencing paranormal things, and some of this will sound very bizarre, but I would wake in the middle of the night, floating out of my bed in midair, and then I would fall to the floor. I also experienced paralysis in my body until I was probably 12, where I'd be awake in my body, but I couldn't move my body. I have studied since out-of-body experiences, and especially the work of the Monroe Institute, and come to learn that a great deal of these experiences are maybe not common, but they're known and understood. But the point of bringing this up is that from the time I was a young kid, I was questioning exactly what was going on in the universe. And then when other things happened, and I questioned my own experiences. It sort of propelled me into researching and understanding, or at least trying to understand what was going on. Later in my life, I had a near-death experience and had experiences from that helped propel me forward to understanding a little more. But again, I'm going to stipulate that I don't profess to know it all, and that especially comes to Bigfoot. So I've had, I believe, what are several run-ins with this species or entity or beings at different ways. And so the first one, when I was about 11 and a half to 12, because I know that because we were living outside of Klamath Falls, Oregon. We had moved out into a big valley in the woods. We were only one of, I believe, two houses out there. My parents had built one house for their business partner and then one house that we ended up moving into. We had about 100 acres. There was a valley that we sort of lived in that was kind of an open space, but then the rest of it was deep woods. And then about maybe 8 miles away, there was like somebody had developed a trailer park. Anyway, as a kid, I used to just, we raised livestock and so forth. And my parents hunted and fished and all that stuff. We all did. So being in the woods was, just an everyday occurrence. I spent all my hours when I wasn't doing chores out in the woods. I was fascinated with birds, especially hawks and stellar jays, which are those dark blue jays that make a lot of noise through the forest. And I was always trying to follow these birds and get a closer look because as I'm an artist, and so I was always trying to get closer to these animals so that I could draw them. Because when I went to the library and checked out books on birds and stuff, they had pretty decent photographs, but I always wanted to get closer to sort of observe them in more detail. So I had a natural curiosity in that way. And before we had moved to Klamath Falls, we had lived in Death Valley, California, and I had spent hours and hours out in the desert looking at animals. I used to catch all kinds of animals just to observe them and then release them. But anyway, when we were on this property in Klamath Falls, Wyoming, it was routine that I just went out into the forest and I would sit, or I would follow some animal as quietly as possible to see if I could get close to it. And we had two dogs, and these two dogs were just great dogs, but they also they were brother and sister. They also were uh, seemingly not afraid really to get into anything. I remember they got into a porcupine. They got in a fight with a coyote that lasted for hours at night around our house. So they were pretty scrappy little dogs. And one particular day when this first experience happened, I just went for a walk out in the woods. And what that meant was that our house that was already in the woods at the edge of this valley, I just walked directly behind our house and I just kept walking. There was no trails, there was nothing. And I did this quite often, but this particular day I walked a long ways. I remember I walked for a couple hours, which was, I wasn't going fast. I was stopping every once in a while looking for, chipmunks or birds or whatever. But I do remember it was probably about 2 hours into the hike, and my two dogs are, just, tagging along with me, sniffing everything. Um, and I remember we saw my dogs walked right past a nighthawk. I think they're called nighthawks. It's this bird that lives in the ground. It has a little nest in the ground. And because I was pretty observant, I just happened to see it. and they just walked right past it. They didn't know it was there. And then it ended up flying out. But anyway, we were at about that juncture, and something screamed extremely loud. I remember as a kid, I was pretty good at judging distances because I remember, we would go out berry picking or hunting or, other things out in the woods, and you would hear noises or, you know, because there's no traffic out there. You could kind of judge how far something was away. If my memory serves me, I would guess that the scream I heard was probably uh, 500 to 800 yards away from me. It wasn't close, but it wasn't that far away. Um, but it was, I knew it wasn't human, and I knew it wasn't, well, at the time, I guessed that it was like a cougar or something. I had no idea, but I'd never heard a cat make that sort of a noise. The best way I could sum it up is it was a scream and a growl and probably a scream and a growl combined. And it was just really loud. I mean, it was so loud. And what I immediately felt after it happened was to get home. That was it. I immediately thought need to get out of here. And when the scream happened, my dogs, they were standing in front of me, one on pretty much either side, about 3 feet apart. When the scream happened, they looked at me. And then I just looked down at them, and my instinct was to go home. And I said, go home, to the dogs. And they just immediately headed back toward our house. Now I was 11, 12 years old. I just assumed the dogs knew their way home, but evidently they didn't, because we ended up at that trailer park, it was probably about 5 or 6, 7 miles from our house. And it took us a long time to get back. I remember that because it was dark when we got to that trailer park, and I had to knock on somebody's door and ask them to call my parents. This is back when you actually knew somebody's phone number, because there was no cell phones. But so anyway, then my parents drove down to pick me up, and I never really thought that much about that experience. At the time, I just chalked it up and thought, well, it must have been some sort of. I knew it wasn't a bear because I didn't think bears made screams. I knew that cougars or mountain lions would scream, but the volume of the scream was so loud. I could tell that it was a great distance away, but it was so loud, it was almost as if it was a mountain lion, it was next to me. It was like within 100 feet, but I knew it wasn't because I could tell the distance that it had traveled. So, I'm sure I must have mentioned it to my parents. But anyway, and I used to sleep. Now, this was after we had been at that house for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. I can't remember exactly, but it was soon after this, within, I'm trying to remember, but within a few months, I think, or maybe a year, that my parents moved. I never thought of it as a kid because um, we moved a lot. We moved, I think, 13 times by the time I was 15 and moved out on my own. But years later, this was in, I think, 1999 or 2000, I went down to visit my mother, who was living in another state. And during that visit, I don't remember how it came up. I think she brought it up because I wouldn't have brought it up because Bigfoot wasn't even in my sort of spectrum of thinking. I literally haven't really thought about Bigfoot much my whole life until probably the last 2 years. But she brought up the fact that in that house one night she peered into one of our bedrooms. I was one of two other siblings, so there was three of us. She peered into one of our bedrooms, probably just to check on us to see if we were asleep or whatever. And she said that she saw, and she was trembling when she told me this. And this is, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years after the fact. And this is a woman who hunted and fished her entire life. She has had all kinds of stories about getting chased up trees by moose, and I mean all kinds of stuff. These were farmers or ranchers. That's born and bred. I mean, that's for generations. So she wasn't a woman who was afraid of really much of anything, I don't believe, as far as the animal world. Um, and she said she looked in to peer in the bedroom, and when that house was a one-story concrete block house with two fireplaces, one at each end. The bedrooms were on one side of the house for us kids in a line, and then on the other side of the house was their bedroom and a living room. And when she said she saw a black creature looking in the window, and it had reddish eyes, and she said that its whole head took up the entire window. And I remember the windows in our bedrooms, they were probably, this isn't exact, but I do have a photo actually at my place. I was just looking through some photos the other day. I think I have a photo of one of the windows. But I think the windows were probably 24 by 30, just small windows, whatever would fit in easily with a concrete block construction. But she said she could tell that the creature was bent down and looking in by the way its head was positioned and cocked a little bit. And those windows would be probably at 6 feet height. So if it was bending down and looking in, and I remember the eaves of the house were probably 24 inches, and the ceiling height was 8, I believe. I do construction, so I kind of remember some basic things. So if it was bending down, looking in the window, I would presume it was at least taller than 6 feet, potentially 7 feet, or who knows how much taller. There's no way for me to know because I didn't see it. But as she told me this, and this was in the daylight, I was there with my ex. We were just having general conversation, but as soon as she started talking about this memory, she was visibly shaken, and this was like 25 years later. So, I didn't think that much about it at the time, other than the fact, well, she attributed it to being a demon because she's, very religious Christian, and that's kind of her beliefs. If it isn't a known creature, then it must be a devil. So, anyway, she said it was very hairy. It was black. It had a huge head that filled basically the window. It was bent down, obviously having to look in, so I'm trying to give you as much information because I know from your interviews you go back and question people and ask about things. So I'm trying to give you detail. She didn't mention that she saw its teeth or anything else. She just mentioned that it looked very evil, which to me I could perceive that maybe it just had a straight look on its face, like because other people described the Bigfoot that have, some of them don't have any expression, so they look very serious. And when people look serious, people think they're mad, but they potentially aren't. They just don't have any expression on their face. So it's hard to say. But anyway, my family ended up moving after that, not long after that. And it was only in the last couple of years I've been thinking about that. I thought, I wonder if that's why they moved. because she was so visibly shaken 20, 25 years later. It must have really shaken her up then. Um, there was another incident I remember at that same house. My brother came in from hunting one time. He was out hunting deer, and he said a deer ran past him, and one of its hind legs was completely detached and only hanging by the skin. And then he had tried to pursue it. It was running on three legs. He tried to pursue it and to, excuse me, harvest it because it was obviously injured, but he couldn't find it. At least I don't remember that he found it. But now looking back, I think that's highly unusual. I remember that he thought that a hunter might have shot it in the back leg and that the leg was flopping. But knowing anatomy, at least my best guess is that doesn't really sound correct, because he said its leg was actually flopping over its back as it was hopping. And that sounds more like, to me, maybe something grabbed it and wrenched on it so hard. Maybe it was a Bigfoot. Who knows? We'll never know. Um, so I'm trying to think if there was anything else from that house. I don't think so. I think that was it. So I heard the scream. My mother saw something, and then we moved. So whatever all that means. But I do remember that scream was something that made me physically just want to leave. And again, of course, if you heard a cougar or a bear, you'd do the same. I did come face to face with a bear one time, and my immediate response was to run. It was literally 3 feet in front of me. I had gone down into a push-up position to drink out of a creek that was filled with reeds, like cattails and stuff. I was with my grandparents looking at a piece of property, and I just went down a push-up position. I was a young teen, probably about 2 years after this, and was sucking up the water, and I heard something lapping the water that started directly after I started. And I looked up, and I was looking directly in the eyes of a black bear, and its eyes got bigger. You could see the whites of its eyes, and obviously mine did the same. I ran one direction, and it ran the other. So the next thing I experienced was in about 2000. I went camping when I was married, and my ex and I went camping outside of Bend. I think it was outside of Bend, Oregon. Yeah, it was outside of Bend, Oregon. And we were visiting some relatives of hers, and we had decided to camp in a tent overnight. And it was a very dry area. There were trees around, but not as thickly packed as you'd have around Portland, Oregon, or Klamath Falls. But there was a lot of trees. We were up on some sort of a rise of a hill or a bluff, if you will, because when we looked out the tent, the landscape went down, and then you could see for a while. And in the middle of the night when we were camping, I woke up, which I usually don't, especially at that age. Now I'm 60, so I do wake up more often than I used to. But at that age, this is 25 years ago, I normally would just sleep completely through the night. Nothing would wake me up. My parents used to have a saying that, don't try to talk to our youngest before they've had breakfast, because I would just be sort of a zombie until I got some food in me. So I would just sleep through the night. But anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night inside the tent, and the tent was filled with the worst stench and putrid smell. I mean, it just smelled like a dead body to me. Like if you come upon like a dead cow or coyote or even a snake when it's dead. It just stinks. It was just the most putrid smell, and it was just filling the tent. Um, and when I woke up, I remember propping myself up on my elbow, and my elbow was next to, and my sleeping bag was next to where the tent top came down to meet the ground where it attaches to the bottom of the tent. So there's a little corner there, all the way around the tent. And so my arm was on the sleeping bag next to the bottom of the tent. And beside this, once I was I was nearly gagging on the smell. I think I was possibly gagging on the smell, just like, ugh. I didn't say anything though. I heard something outside the tent. And it sounded, the best description I could think of is it sounded like almost as if somebody had a broom with hair on it or fur or something soft like that. It wasn't a stiff bristle straw sound like that type of a broom. It was kind of like somebody had a softer textured broom, and it was just kind of being moved around next to the tent. And then I could see that the wall of the tent, not far from my elbow, was moving. And I just reflexively drew my elbow in tighter to my torso. And this thing moved right. So if I would have cut a hole in the tent and looked out, it would have been right there, inches from me. And it paused near my elbow, it paused there, and then it continued around sort of the back of me. So I heard it travel probably 5 or 6 feet, because I heard it a little distance away, perhaps it was at the front of the tent, maybe not even that far, 3 or 4 feet. Because I woke up, I smelled the awful smell, I heard the sound. It came closer, it got really close to me, and then it went just behind me, and then I heard it get softer and softer, I presume farther and farther away from me, and then the smell gradually went away. The thing that significantly stands out as a marker for me in the whole experience, and I've witnessed this in people who have talked on your show and other things, is that people have this fear that enters their entire physiological being. So your whole body is on alert, you're shaking, you basically fear for your life. It's a fight and flight response. And when I woke up, I was already in that. So even before I consciously was aware that maybe there was something outside the tent, I already had that physiological response. And when I hear other people talk about this physiological response, because I've spent a great deal of my life trying to understand our consciousness and unconscious mind and how it operates, and our being as souls, because we are definitely more than our body, because I've experienced being out of my body. My point is that when this fear or this physiological action happens in the body where you actually are in terror, we could label it as physiological terror. It's a fight and flight response to get out of there. To me, to my understanding, is that it's from our unconscious. So our unconscious, as I've come to understand, is awake 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It never sleeps. That's why a person can be put under hypnosis and they can recall all kinds of details, from every license plate they saw, on their drive home, to memories from, years ago. They can remember everything because their unconscious records everything, and our conscious is just it's only tracking so much stuff. So I believe that it was an unconscious response that woke me up. My unconscious was aware of this creature, whatever it was, that it was a imminent threat or potential threat because it was more physically or possibly other powerful than myself as a human being, and it woke me up. And then I had that experience. One other experience that I had, well, I've had it more than twice. I've had it actually, now I'm sitting here thinking about it, I've had it multiple times. That was like this. So I went to Yosemite. This was about 4 years ago with my, uh, t- yeah, they were a teenager at that time. They're still teenager. But we went to Yosemite for a week and we camped about 10 minutes from the entrance to Yosemite. It was a nice, close place to hang out. Um, and everything went fine there. We had a great time. We skateboarded around the whole place. It was just fantastic. Um, but we did take a trail up above the big lodge there, and we didn't go far into nature. Um, but when we were on that trail, and it was getting close to being dark, so the sun was going down, we were losing light. We were on that trail. My physiological body, it just lit up. Like there was this intense fear and fight or flight. We were just on a trail. We could still see the buildings. If we ran hard, we could get to those buildings in fairly quick order. But my youngster was just having fun, doing whatever, and we were joking around. But this physiological change happened in my body, and I had the intense feeling. Uh, I don't know whether it was true or not, but I had this intense feeling that I was being observed, and I was also being tracked. And so I think our unconscious knows, like, if what's transpiring in the environment, while our conscious may not be fully aware. But because I was physiologically triggered by something, and then the information I was receiving was that I was being watched and tracked, made me think that there is something actually watching me and tracking me. And I kept looking behind us, and at one point, I just started walking backwards. Even though we were on a rocky trail, I started walking backwards in case there was like a cougar or something that was tracking us and following us, because I know that they like to stalk from behind. And but I never saw anything. I expedited us leaving quickly. I said, "Hey, why don't we, trot down to there was like some buildings and stuff, and there was a gift store." I said, "Why don't we just go down there and go to the gift store?" And so we did. But that was the same feeling. And another time, well, I had that feeling several times. And another location, though, was where I actually saw a creature, and that was in Long Beach, Washington. But before, well, mostly after, and that may be tied into my own psychology. I just say that because once you have an experience, you may, make stuff up in your head, right? So, but I did have, that said, I did have experiences after I saw that creature because I worked up there for about a year and a half during COVID. And sometimes I would be, sitting up at night or going to bed, and I would have that same intense feeling, like I need to get the heck out of there because something's watching me. And it wasn't very often, but when it came on, it was very thick and intense. That's the only way I could say it. Um, so, it could be said, well, because you had that experience. Maybe you have a fear of an unknown creature. So then you have these feelings once in a while based on your mood. And I could say, yeah, that could be right. Maybe there was absolutely nothing there. I could totally go along with that, because without facts, without evidence, I'm just going to presume that it's an unknown. So I kind of look at things as very practical. But I also have to include things that I may not have control or understanding of. I'll give you an example. So I was in a couple auto accidents that put me in bed for 3 years, and this was about 30 years ago, before I had a near-death experience. And I shared a daylight basement with my landlady, who was a retired teacher. And one day the daylight basement, so her laundry was in the basement, but it was on the other side of a wall. So I had to go through a door to go to the laundry. So I would go do my laundry. So one day I opened up the door to go into the laundry, and I saw a ghost sitting on the steps that go up to her main house. And I looked directly at the image that faded really fast, and I asked the question, "Who are you?" When I asked that question, I heard a loud noise in my apartment, just on the other side of my wall. When I asked the question, immediately in my mind, I heard the name Kenneth. So I thought, okay. And I asked, "What do you want?" And it said, "Turn out the lights." This is not very odd, right? And weeks before this, I had something knocking on the door several times, and I'd get up and look out the door, and nobody was there. So anyway, I just said, okay. And so I just did my laundry. When I went back into my side of the apartment, wondering what the loud noise was, I saw that all my books that had been stacked on a shelf next to the wall had flown across the room, hit the other wall, and dropped down to the floor. And then I thought about what that apparition, the ghost, wanted for me, and that was to turn out the lights. And I thought, okay, I was on reconnaissance. I ended up having to go on bed rest soon after that. So anyway, because I was had all these symptoms and stuff, I would stay up late watching movies, and I would fall asleep, and I would leave the lights on. And evidently, the ghost wanted me to turn out the lights. I was like, why does this ghost want me to turn out the lights? About 2 weeks later, my landlady came down. She was doing laundry. So I went out there and I talked to her and stuff. And she tells me, she says, and she had never talked about her personal stuff. She was a very introverted woman. Very nice. Anyway, so just while I was talking to her, she happened to say, hey, there's stuff in that closet over there. And if there's anything there you want, you can have it. And I thought, well, I'm not going to go through her personal stuff, But about, I don't know, a few days later, I thought, well, I had nothing to do. As I thought, well, I'll just go through there. Maybe there's some, something I could use, So I went through the closet and I was looking. There wasn't that much stuff in there. But at the very back of the closet, in the corner was something. It looked metal, and I pulled it out. And it was a sword. It was an incredibly beautiful military sword. It had engraving. And on the blade, as I pulled it out of the sheath, it said Kenneth, and it had her last name. So it was about, I don't know, sometime after that, not too long though, I asked her, because obviously her husband's name was Kenneth, and this ghost told me its name was Kenneth. And I think I asked her, oh, how long were you and your husband married? And she shared, and she said that he died on Mount Everest, climbing Mount Everest. And so I saw the continuity between what the ghost said, the verification of the name he gave me, and a sword. And then she told me he died a tragic death, probably thinking of her when he passed. And my own experience and perspective is that when we pass away, we're simply into a fourth dimension, the next dimension. So we have access to this one, just like you and I can tell the difference between a line and a dot. But if we were a point, sorry, if we were only a point, we would never comprehend a line. Also, if we were a line, we wouldn't comprehend something three-dimensional like a cube, because it wouldn't be in our consciousness. But because we are three-dimensional, we can perceive both a point and a line. We can see in lower dimensions and understand it, but we can't vice versa. We can't understand the fourth dimension because we don't exist there. However, when you pass over, you are in another dimension and can perceive everything here. And so some beings, people, souls, choose to be attached to this dimension and want to interact with it. And that's exactly, at least my understanding is what he did. He wanted to get my attention. He moved the books off my shelf. He presented himself. And then, I immediately asked him a question, what do you want? So it was my general understanding that he wanted me to use less electricity because my electricity was included in my rent, which wasn't much. And it was after that I decided, okay, I'm going to turn out the lights, make sure the TV's off at a certain time. I never had a knock on the door again. I never had any visitation from him again. Nothing. And I lived there another 3 years. So there are things that I don't understand, so I can't really say that. Coming back to that gut feeling of fear, there may be that when I was at the beach several times when I had that feeling that something was watching me. Maybe something was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But so I'm trying to think in chronological order. So I heard the scream in Klamath Falls. I went camping in Bend and smelled something. And at the time, I didn't think of a Bigfoot. It just wasn't in my spectrum. My parents were religious. We weren't allowed to watch scary movies, so I never watched any Bigfoot movies. I mean, I've heard of Bigfoot. I saw the stickers and stuff when I was a kid and thought it was fun, but I never thought anything of it. So when I smelled something awful in my tent the next day, I just thought, well, maybe it was a badger, And I remember I followed the outside the tent. I exited the tent the next morning, excuse me, and the ground was hard and dry, but it looked like somebody took a broom or a piece of fabric or something and had sort of, walked over the ground with it. Like they had sort of broomed the ground. And it was distinct though. I could tell that it was sort of a path because that effect on the ground was near the front of the tent, and then there was bushes and stuff. It came around where I sensed it and heard it and smelt it, though the smell was in the whole tent. There was no point of where the smell came from. It was just everywhere. And then I saw that those effects on the ground continued, and then they went down sort of a slight embankment or a hill slightly, maybe 20 feet. And then they just stopped. So I didn't see any footprints or anything, but I was trying to rationalize this, thinking, what animal exists close to the ground, might stink awful, and be curious around people's tent. And I thought, well, I've never really seen a badger in real life. So I thought, well, maybe it was a badger, maybe because badgers, I think, are dirty animals and they live in the ground and eat dead things as well as live things, and kind of like possum smell. But I thought, well, maybe it was a badger. Their fur is close to the ground. They sort of, they probably make some sort of brushing sound when they move across the ground because they have such short legs. So I just chalked it up as that. It still doesn't explain the fear, however, and my physiological reaction, because I was raised around animals, investigated animals, followed animals. I didn't really have an innate fear of badgers or really anything. I mean, I guess we all do to some degree, though. If we hear something or smell something in the middle of the night, we might fear, well, is that a bear? That would definitely scare me. But so anyway, so there was the sound of the call in Klamath Falls, and my mother seeing it in the window, then the tent camping and the smell. And then we fast forward another 20 years till about 2 years ago. I was working outside of Long Beach, Washington. I worked up there for about a year and a half. But it was like the first couple weeks that I had gone up there. I would go up there for a week and then come back for a week. And I went up there and brought my youngster, and they were I think about 8 or 9 at the time. And we were staying in this beach house. It's a fairly large house. On one end, it forms an L, and on one end, there's 2 stories. And where we were going to sleep and slept was on the second floor of that main house. So we came in the house. We came in the evening when it was dark, got out of the car, went into the house. We went directly upstairs to that big open room where there were several beds, because they have guests and stuff there. And for whatever reason, I have no idea why, but as soon as I went up and I put our little luggage on the bed, and my youngster's like bouncing around off the walls, happy to be out of the car, I looked out the window. There was a small window that was maybe 30 inches wide and 3 feet tall. I looked out the window, and when I looked out the window, I looked down, and when I looked out the window and down, the light, we had also turned on the lights in the kitchen just as we had come in. It's my habit, I'll turn lights on. We had turned on the lights, headed up the stairs, and when I looked down the window, the light through the kitchen windows was casting a broad amount of light across over the ground next to the house. And next to the house, there's one tree, and then there's just a bunch of tall grass. And this house is set right on the coast. I mean, you can walk, that's probably 500 yards to the beach. You have to go over some sand dunes, but so when I looked out, that light was cascading light for at least 50, 60 feet. And then it must have been light enough out, because I could easily see the grass as it went across this small field of land, maybe 500 feet or 800 feet, and then there was forest. And when I looked out and down, I immediately saw a creature. And the creature was standing on 2 feet. It was looking in the kitchen window. But when I entered the space of the window looking out, I cast a shadow in the light. And it immediately saw the change in light. So I looked out, I saw it. Its head was headed toward the window, looking in the window, peering in. And when it saw the change in light, it immediately looked directly up at me. And it didn't look like up at the window like, oh, what's going on? It went from looking in the window to looking at me directly in the eye. And it held eyes with me until it turned its head and walked away the entire time. It never didn't hold eye contact with me. It looked directly in my eyes, and it held my eye contact for probably the 3 to 4 seconds it took for it to turn and begin walking down through the grass, and then it exited into the forest. So I'll describe this creature as best as I can. So I'm 6 foot. if I would have been standing next to it, I know it would have been at least, if it would have been standing perfectly upright, let's put it that way, it probably would have been 7 feet. But it was hunched over at about a 15-degree angle. Its legs were short for its height, and its arms were long for its height. Its arms hung down past its waist, and it had hands. It had no protruding ears like a bear. It was dark gray. Its hair was probably 4 to 6 inches long, and it seemed like oily, sort of, especially around its face and its head. Its hair just seemed matted and dirty. Its eyes were fairly good size and probably the size of a quarter. Its nose, it did not have a protruding muzzle. These are things that I've gone through in my head a million times since this occurrence, because I thought at first, oh, that's a bear. And I immediately, after it lost eye contact with me, I came away from the window and told my youngster, hey, there's a bear out there. And then we both looked, and we could both watch it as it walked away and it entered the forest. But since then, and I think, yeah, my friends that I was working for were home, and I went downstairs and said, hey, there was a bear outside looking in the window. And I still did not think about that it wasn't a bear. I just thought, oh, it must be a bear, because I hadn't seen a bear since I was like 12 years old. And, I didn't think about Bigfoot. But then since then, shortly after that, I saw a mother bear and 3 cubs right in front of me in my car, and I stopped the car and I actually watched them for about 10 minutes. And I thought to myself, that is not what I saw outside that window. And then it was probably 6 months after that, a big male bear walked in front of my car across the road. This bear just owned the territory. I mean, he never hesitated to walk onto the road. He took his time crossing it, went down the other side, and I just sat there in my car and watched the whole thing. It was huge. That was not the creature I saw. For some very specific physiological reasons, the difference. So, this creature looked, when it was looking me in the eye, there was also a shift in its mood. And I say that because there was some sort of subtle physiological change in its face as soon as it saw me. It went from looking in the window to looking at me, and then its face seemed to be sort of like chagrined or disappointed, or like, oh, brother, never mind. Like, somebody saw what I was doing. Okay, I'm going back to the woods. It was just sort of this look, the shift of mood, as if some sort of mood had changed within it. That was my perception. And so it had no protruding ears like a bear. A bear's ears just stick out. I mean, they're so funny. It's like a cartoon, like Mickey Mouse or something. A bear has a very pronounced muzzle like a dog. This creature did not have that. Its face was more flat, and its nose it wasn't large. I know from your podcast you always ask this question, did it look more like a human or more like an ape? And I would say it was somewhere in between. I couldn't call it a human, that's for sure, and it definitely didn't look like an ape, but it was something altogether in itself different. Its mouth was just a slit, surrounded by hair. I didn't see any teeth. When it walked away, or when it turned its head and walked away, it seemed to have a different its head had a different shape than our head. So I can't remember the term. The way apes' heads are shaped. They have that ridge or something. But from the front, its head just looked round, like its hair was matted, and it had less hair around around its nose and mouth and eyes, and it had white, like it almost looked like it was old. It had sort of wrinkles around its eyes, and like it had had a hard day. I mean, this creature looked like it had had a rough life, like, you know, and maybe me interrupting its small entertainment of watching humans, shifted its mood. I don't know. But it looked like it was old to me. That was my first um, initial reaction when I saw it. Even when I thought it was a bear, thinking it was a bear, I thought that's a really old bear. Like, man, that's an old bear. I've never seen an old bear. And it's I remember its hands, which was so funny. When you see something unusual, you go like, what? You don't really comprehend it till like later. The paranormal stuff I get right away because I've had that stuff happen my whole life. I get stories go on and on about that. But so when I experience something paranormal, I'm like, oh yeah, there it goes again. There's something paranormal. I don't even think much about it. But seeing an odd creature at the time is sort of puts you in this. At least it did me. It put me in a conscious state of like, what? like like I didn't even really comprehend what I was viewing, but because the thing had hands, and I didn't even think about it at the time. Bears don't have hands; they have paws and they have claws, and those are really obvious. And their shoulders and chest and everything's shaped different. A distinctive thing that stood out, even at the time when I saw this creature, was, man, that bear has massive deltoids. This thing had its shoulders were enormous. It's like a weightlifter that went to the gym, but the only thing he did was do deltoid exercises for like 10 years. Like his deltoids were much bigger in mass than his biceps, triceps, forearms, even his chest muscles. I mean, he was fairly slender, this creature was, but his deltoids were big. Um, I remember them just standing out. Um, I'm assuming it was a male. I didn't see any. His chest seemed more like a man's, like flat, though it was covered with hair. And uh, I remember noticing that its legs were short, and that's probably what led me to the bear thing, because bears' legs are short, their back legs. But in the moment, I didn't even look at the feet. I don't remember what its feet looked like. But I remember that it did something. Another thing very unusual was that a bear, if it sees you, it might glance at you and then it'll just do something different if it's going to do something different. Like if you're at a stream and a bear's looking at the water and you walk up, it'll look at you and it'll immediately just leave, or it'll immediately come towards you. It'll do something immediate, but it won't keep eye contact generally. I don't in general, but it moves immediately. And a bear has a neck. Their neck will move. So when they are standing, if they're going to turn, they usually go down onto all fours, and then they'll turn and walk away. I guess they will turn, but it seems uncomfortable for a bear if they're on their back feet to turn away from you on their back feet. They'll usually go down and then turn. That's my opinion. But this creature, when it saw me, so it turned, it looked me directly in the eye, and then its whole torso and lower body just shifted and turned in unison directly toward me and away from me, because when I first saw it, I saw it sort of from it was about a 3/4 view. So I could see the front of its body, but it was turned mostly toward the window. And then it turned toward me and looked at me. So then it was facing me, but its whole body moved. And then it turned in one motion, and then it stayed hunched over the whole time, and then it started walking away on its back feet. But it did hunch down slightly lower as it was doing that, but the ground does go down a little bit there. And that's when I broke away, told my youngster, "Hey, there's a bear outside." And then we both came to the window, and by that time it had moved probably 20 feet, 15, 20 feet away through this tall grass that was about 3 feet high. And the grass was hitting it at about its waist. And now when a bear is down on all fours, first of all, a bear will walk away on all fours. It's not going to walk away on 2 feet. This creature was still on its 2 feet. And when it was walking away, so what I saw was the back of its shoulders and its head, just like you would see a human, as if they were hunched over at about a 15-degree angle. You would see this flatness of their back, and then it would curve down to their waist, and then you'd see the back of their head. Whereas a bear, if it's standing on all fours, a bear's back is sort of a peak shaped. It comes to that peak where their shoulders meet. And then you see the back of their head, which seems very large as they're walking away, and their ears are sticking out. This, however, was the exact shape of a man. The shape of the shoulders, of course, the shoulders were bigger, but the shape of the head. And during the shifting of moving toward me around, and then as it exited, it didn't really move its neck a whole lot. There was probably some subtle movement in its neck, but it seemed to move its whole body in sort of a uniform sequence. It never made any sounds. It never looked back. It just continued walking through the tall grass, and then it just disappeared into the forest.
Do you remember if the eyes had any whites to them at all?
No, there was no whites to the eyes. They seemed slightly recessed, and there was a lot of sort of wrinkling around them. That's why I think my perception was that this was something old. Because at the time I remember thinking, gosh, that's a really old bear. I've never seen an old bear. Because usually when you see bears, they're vibrant, they're young, even adult bears look young, But this thing just seemed old. Like, I only got a few months left, and I'm trying to entertain myself here, and you interrupted me, and left. So it just seemed old. And the things that make me think that is the way its eyes were kind of recessed and aged looking, the wrinkles, and its skin on its face seemed taut. It was thin. It wasn't like, you wouldn't call it a robust animal. Of course, chimpanzees look fairly emaciated most of the time, but those things are strong. So that could be an illusion. But it didn't seem vibrant. It didn't seem like it was in its youth, let's put it that way. And then it was a combination of that and the gray color of the fur that made me think, especially around the face, because it turned really light gray and some places kind of white. It made me think it was old. So,
wow, that must have been. Well, I guess I'll ask: how did that affect you after you had that actual face to face and you were able to get a really, really good look at what you encountered?
Well, the thing is at the time I just thought, oh, it must have been an old bear, you know. But it was later I started thinking about like that's not a bear because I had four bears total walk basically in front of me when I was driving my car. And so I had to literally stop my car and watch these black bears walk in front of me. And I looked at those black bears and then I thought about what I saw and I thought, that was not a bear, you know? So, and then I started investigating what that could have been. So then I started looking at Bigfoot podcasts and listening to stuff, and then I started going back and writing down and drawing out what I saw, and I thought, there's no way that was a bear. There's too many physical markers that would make it not a bear. There's the shape of its shoulders as it walked away, the way that it turned, the absence of ears protruding out, the lack of a snout, the fact that it had hands, which is weird. It's funny, like people was there's a car accident, people remember different things, and some things they don't even remember. It's like seeing one of these creatures because it's so outside of norm. Um, I just didn't even think about it, like the fact that it had hands until later. I'm like, the thing had hands. The thing I can remember the size of its hands were huge, and I remember the thumb, like its thumb being there. And it was higher. It's like its palm was longer than ours. Um, it's like if you look at your hand and you stretch your palm out, the palm section of your hand, maybe 25, maybe 15 to 25% more. It was shaped like that. So it was like a longer hand. That's the only way I could describe it. And its hand, like if you put our hand up to our face, it can cover so much of our face. I think if this creature would have put its hand on its face, its fingers probably would have easily, you know, reached up high onto its forehead. I mean, it had very large hands and fingers.
So
So,
it's so interesting. I mean, that whole area is really, really well. I mean, it's really well known for a lot of Bigfoot stuff. And I mean, there's stuff that I've taken over the years from that, I would say, region, definitely. There's so much. It's I'm not surprised at all that you had that kind of sighting in that area of Washington. Yeah.
yeah.
And just a few years ago. Wow.
Yeah, that was, I guess it was 2020 to 2022. And I'm going back up there here actually this week. So I think I might spend some time. One of your listeners, I can't remember who it was, but they said that a known creature that had been visiting their house, what they did is they put a light on, I think it was in their bathroom or some other or bedroom. And then what they would do, they'd sit at the opposite side of the house and they would look for eye shine for the creature to come near that window that had the light on. And then they could see the eye shine and that would let them know where the creature was. And I was thinking that, you know, if these beings, these creatures like to watch people, which is just, you know, I guess it's just curiosity. If it's just a physical being, um, then that might be a good thing to do. I might stay up late and sit like at a part of the house and leave a light on and just see if something shows up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, are you are you hoping that you might have another sighting when you go back to that area?
I'm totally open to more sightings, but only within the context that I'm safely somewhere where I'm not within arm's reach of these things.
Sure.
Let's put it that way. You know, I used to watch Jacques Cousteau on TV as a kid and all the oceans and the sharks and everything, and I always thought, oh, you know, it'd be so fun to go swimming with sharks and all this stuff. And then I took a trip to Belize and went snorkeling for a month and a black-tipped reef shark swam right up to me, like it was within 4 feet of me. It probably weighed 700 or 800 pounds. I don't know. And the creature appeared so fast in the water next to me because it was chasing a barracuda that came over and parked itself to my right, and the shark came up from my left. So it was obviously chasing the barracuda, and the barracuda said, "Hey, there's lunch here. Leave me alone." But as soon as the shark realized that I was there, it immediately left. But just for that, it was probably a second from the time that the shark swam up, was completely parked and still, and then it disappeared, was maybe 1 to 2 seconds at the most. It was so powerful of a creature. It scared the daylights out of me, and I got out of the water. And, it's funny, we fantasize like, oh yeah, it'd be nice to see these creatures and everything, but I know that I have no interest in actually being in the presence of one of these creatures unless it's like, I wouldn't mind sitting down and talking with one if it's on the other side of maybe shatterproof glass.
Sure.
Like
sure. Right.
like I don't want it with arm reach.
I get
Because
it. Yeah.
so my natural curiosity is, yes, I'd love to see one again, but from the same perspective, I was inside of a building, it was outside.
Mhm.
That was a pretty safe distance. Having one, if that's what it was, near my tent was completely terrifying. So
Did you report this to anyone after you had this sighting?
yeah, I went online and reported maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, once I came to realize that's actually what I experienced. I think it was on MUFON's site. I think it was MUFON. They have a thing where you can just type in your experience, and that's what I did. I thought, well, I just need to add my experience so that they can, statistically sort of follow what people experience. So,
That's really interesting. I've never thought to look into MUFON for Bigfoot reports, but now I
or not
might.
MUFON, not,
It was.
no, it wasn't
Oh, okay.
MUFON. It was,
The
it was a Bigfoot thing. Sorry for the
Oh,
confusion.
you're good. Was it like maybe the BFRO or Bigfoot Mapping Project, maybe something like that?
Yeah, it was probably one of those.
Gotcha. Okay.
But one other thing that I just thought of, and I have no idea what this was. I just have no comprehension. From my own experience with the paranormal and with animals, I know it wasn't either of those, to my understanding, to my best guess. So after my parents moved away from Klamath Falls, when I had that experience with the scream, my mother saw the creature in the window. We moved to Rathdrum, Idaho. I think it's about 20 or 30 minutes outside of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And in that house, it was had a daylight basement. The house was on a hill, and in front of it was a gravel road. And across from the gravel road was a big pond, and the pond was surrounded by cattails. And so you couldn't really get to the pond because there's so much vegetation around it. But I used to, I was a young teen by then. I think I was 13 or 14, and I used to go out at night and walk down the gravel road about a quarter mile down the road to see my friends at night, late at night. I'd just stay up late. And my parents knew I, came and went. They didn't care. But one night after dinner, it was already dark. We had already eaten dinner, and I left the house. I was going down to see my friend Shane. And so I came out the house, I went around the house, and then I went down our driveway, and there's a gravel road, and across there's the pond. I got to the gravel road, and a voice spoke my birth name audibly to me. Now, I changed my name in my late 20s, but my birth name was Christian, but nobody ever called me that. My parents always just called me Chris. That was it. They never once said my birth name that I can recall, unless maybe they were mad at me or something. I don't know. But this voice spoke my birth name to me. it was very loud. It was very clear. But what was weird about it was that it was mechanical. It sounded like a robot almost. It was like question. It was something like that. It was just really bizarre. I remember that two things happened. My brain said, "Who called me by my birth name?" The second thing my brain said is run, and I immediately ran from the road up the driveway into the house. And I remember just standing there shaking. I was physiologically, again, triggered to where my whole body was in fight or flight. And my whole family was standing there, my parents, my brother and sister. And they all said, even I recall my brother being in unison. We never really got along. So he'd be more likely to disagree. But everybody was in unison that I was as white as a sheet. They said it looked like it was white as a piece of paper. And I told them what happened, but I never understood what that was. And I have heard on some reports from different things, whether it's paranormal, UFOs, or Bigfoot, that people have had something say their name out loud or say something else out loud, and it sounded mechanical. It was about 6 months after this. Again, my parents moved. They moved into a rental house, and in the middle of the night, I woke up and I was surrounded in white light. And I'm a teenager. I'm like, where the heck's this light coming from? It was like somebody turned on baseball stadium lights in my room. And as I was just coming to consciousness, I was seeing the top shelf of my closet. And I was like, why do I see the top shelf of my closet? And I'm looking at it, and then I realized I'm looking at the top shelf of the closet through my knees. I'm like, how the heck am I seeing the top shelf of my closet through my knees? And then I fully understood. I came to more consciousness, realizing that I was in a lying position, my knees up, looking through my knees, and I was seeing the top shelf of my closet, and that my body was actually in the air, about 6 feet in the air, about 4 feet away from my bed. As soon as that realization entered my consciousness, as soon as I thought, oh, I'm in the air, I fell, and I fell down. I remember hitting the carpeted floor, it jarring my back and my neck. I immediately got up. The light immediately left. As soon as I started falling, the light left. And then I looked out my back window of my bedroom. It had curtains up, and there was nothing out in the backyard. I looked up at the sky. There was nothing in the sky. I rushed in to tell my parents, like, hey, did you guys see that bright light? And I opened their door. They were sound asleep. I thought, well, I'll go see if my sister saw it. And I looked in her bedroom. She was sound asleep. I don't think my brother was living with us at that house. I think he moved out. But so then I went out the sliding glass door out into the backyard. There was nothing there, just a fenced yard. My parents had rented the house, all houses prior we had owned. There was nothing out in the backyard, nothing up in the sky, absolutely nothing. And I still don't really have an explanation for that other than my research because I've studied near-death experiences for 20-some years. I did come across a experience where there was several people they were meditating and praying, and people reported that this one woman floated off the floor and floated in midair until she became aware of it and she fell to the floor. That's the only experience I had that I found that was similar to mine. So I don't have any explanation for it. Like the weird voice, from the pond, which I've heard that I think from some UFO accounts, and then that thing, I have no idea what that was. So it's very strange.
It's such an incredible lifetime of things you've experienced, and not just Bigfoot related, but across the spectrum, from hearing voices to seeing apparitions to seeing Bigfoot, and it's incredible. Thank you for coming on to share what you've experienced. I think that's probably one of the most best detailed descriptions someone's provided of what they saw when they had a face-to-face encounter with a Bigfoot. Thank you for that.
Sure.
I want to make sure that we are. It's crazy to think that we are already about at the end of our time together today. But I want to make sure that you were able to share everything that you had wanted to share, and maybe if there is more, we'd have to, do a follow up with you in some way for sure.
Yeah, no, I think I've shared everything, especially about Bigfoot. Yeah, I think other things I've experienced are in another field, like paranormal and UFOs and stuff. But no, I just hope I see that your podcast serves us in several ways. It helps create more information.
Mm-hmm.
Like when it comes to documentation of near-death studies, IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, has different markers. Like there's 454 or so commonalities amongst testimonies and stuff that people experience. And I think if those things are like, if we analyze people's experiences in those ways, then we can sort of build information about these experiences and the creatures and reach some sort of, understanding generally what these creatures are about and maybe their roles in life and our lives.
Absolutely.
So it serves in that way. But I think an additional thing your podcast does is it helps anytime we think about something that is outside of our conscious framework, then it challenges us or helps us open up our consciousness about different things. And so we can grow as individuals in understanding a little bit more about our environment, and maybe about ourselves as well. So I think your podcast is doing well to serve everybody who listens to it in multiple ways. So
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Definitely, keep me in mind if anything does happen in future trips out to the coast or anything like that. I'd love to hear if there's anything that happens. But, Stefan, it's been a great time chatting with you today. Thank you for sharing what you experienced, and feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or anything you need to share in future times.
All right. Thank you very much, Jeremiah.
Yes, hi, my name is Brian, and my wife and I have a story of a local Bigfoot or something that is causing some throwing rocks at us, something above charging us, people seeing creatures. Actually had an old lady that lives in the area I'm talking about, had her double wide knocked off the foundation by one of these creatures. And I recently came across a video that was not supposed to be on, wasn't supposed to be leaked. However, somehow or another, it did get leaked. I have the original video. It's only about 15 minutes from my house. I would gladly send it to you. I do appreciate the Christian work that you're doing along with your Bigfoot interviews. I do appreciate that. If you get a chance, call me, and I will tell you about these some of these stories or some of these things that's happened to us, and some of these things that's happened to our friends also. Um, Give me a call, and also I'd like to tell you about this video. It's on. I put it on my channel on Facebook now, um, to show that I did have it, and I am going to do a size comparison in a week or so. I just had a pacemaker put in, so I'm kind of down for another week or two. But anyway, give me a call. I will explain what's going on, and I will send you this video that I think you'll find very interesting. And I assure you that the people that took this video, I do not believe at all that these people would hoax this. I don't. As a matter of fact, if you watch the video, I believe you can see that it is not a hoax. But anyway, I do appreciate you, and I appreciate your content. If you can, give me a call back. Again, my name is Brian. Thank you.
If you'd like to share a voicemail to be potentially featured on the show as well, head over to BigfootSocietyPodcast.com and hit the Share Your Encounter button. Just wanted to take a minute to say thank you for listening to this episode of the Bigfoot Society podcast. Stefan's story is one of those that lingers, not just because of what he saw, but because of how many times it came back, from the screams in the woods to the eyes in the window to the voice that knew his name. His story reminds us that sometimes it's not us who find the unknown, it's the unknown that finds us. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to the channel on YouTube, hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes, and share this one with a friend who's in the Sasquatch, Washington, or something that gets a little weird. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please make sure you're following the show, and if you'd be willing to leave a 5-star positive review, it helps us grow and get more stories like this out there. And if you or someone you know has had a Bigfoot encounter, especially in places like Klamath Falls, Long Beach, or anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, I'd love to hear from you. So please email me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Thanks again for being part of the Bigfoot Society. And until next time, keep your eyes open, trust your gut, and never stop asking what else might be out there. And see you in the woods.